in minor leagues, wherever it is, you tell the stories. And I know Doug is doing a lot of that, and I think bringing that more to light. So I don't feel like I'm sticking my neck out, really. I mean, I think you're just pointing people to a direction of what is really obvious. I mean, these players pioneered. They were part of Major League Baseball. And, look, I understand that economic systems were different then and, all these things that happened and changed. I interviewed Rob Manfred at one point before I was laid off, obviously, in 2017. I believe it was early. And I asked him about it, and he mentioned that, all right, if you take the side of it was unprecedented to go back for any of these industries with labor structures such as Major League Baseball to go back and find some money and create some benefit, financial and other, to go back and help players and give them something. Okay, so that's great. That was unprecedented. But where I think baseball falls short in this regard is telling the rest of that story. Okay, we've opened the door. Now we can set a new precedent by finishing that story. I think that's what we're trying to compel and really discuss at a greater level. Why do we do that? Well, our history in baseball is so different. It's like no other sport. It's really like no other industry. But there's always been this storytelling, day-to-day connectivity, the building of the system of the game, and the successes that the players, whether it's Curt Flood and other, those type of stories have been really what's allowed the game to create the system it has today, and the players to enjoy what they're able to enjoy financially in many other ways. So I think it's just pointing people, just like I was pointed to even more clearly with Doug Gladstone's work, pointing people to it. I don't see it necessarily being, controversial in that regard. I mean, yeah, you're just saying, hey, these guys made sacrifices early on. They were players. They fell short of certain numbers that were kind of arbitrary or whatever, and now here's an opportunity to still recognize them in a way that's unprecedented and really sets our game apart. I think that could be a great thing for baseball.
What is it, Doug? You are a contemporary of Tony Clark, and we've invited Mr. Clark, we've invited Steve Rogers, we've invited Commissioner Manfred. They have an open invitation to appear on this podcast any time they want, because we feel it's only fair, it's only right that they try to get their story out there and maybe give an explanation as to what is the holdup, what is, why is it so difficult to successfully remedy or correct this problem. You're a contemporary of Tony Clark's. What's going on in his head? Why doesn't he make a pronouncement? He's always letting Steve Rogers do his dirty work by making a public pronouncement, or he's letting Greg Boris, the director of communications, make the statement on his behalf. Why doesn't he have, there's no other way to say it, the stones, not the Gladstones, but the stones to, to just say, look, this is why, I'm not going to, because as our listeners probably are aware, it has to emanate, it has to begin at the collective bargaining table. The first salvo has to be from the players' union in these negotiations. And I can tell you that to a person, when Tony Clark was elected executive director, the first former player to be anointed to that position, all of these guys, I mean, David Clyde, Carmen Fanzone, you name it, Steve Grilli, they all, to a person, said, finally, at last, someone, who's one of us, a former player who gets it, who knows about our struggles. And you know what? They've had the wind taken out of their sails. So you know Tony Clark way better than I do. What's going through his head?
Well, it's hard to say, because I don't know exactly, when you talk about specific to this issue, I work with Tony in the executive subcommittee. We got this job is because of how he conducted himself and understanding the issues. Like you said, he had this hybrid ability to be a player, but, get at a deeper level a lot of the issues that are involved in the game. And I'm sure, it's a challenge for starters to be a player. And you're dealing with Rob Manfred, who's like a lifelong labor, person, lawyer, and so that's a different animal to try to get everybody in the room on the same page. And I think that one of the issues, if from a distance, that I look at is you can't. It's one of those things that does not get solved by each individual part. Like the sum of the parts don't equal the whole in this case. I think because it requires everybody to be in the room. Because in the end, like, for example, let's take the Players Association. He can't unilaterally say, because the players are the ones who are really supposed to dictate what issues they're concerned about or want in a collective bargaining season, right? And I think he's tapping, when he was a player, making sure that, okay, I hear, the players want whatever. They want different hotel arrangements when they're on the road or whatever so he has to now be a conduit of that. So if the players are not aware or as informed on the issues about making that a priority, it won't become a priority. That's one. And then the other is there's a symbiotic dependency that needs to happen with Major League Baseball, with the funding and deciding like how this all plays out. I saw in one of Doug's articles, I think you mentioned something about $6.5 million a year to accomplish the goal of $10,000 per player. I think I got that right?
Yeah, you got it exactly right.
Right, so 640 players times 10,000. So somewhere in that ballpark. So by itself, it's Players Association, well, if you take the pension, that's a whole other question, but like within its sort of operating budget, right, you have to figure that out and make a commitment. And you also have to make sure you understand all the laws that govern, like can you actually target one particular class of your constituents? Now, all these things are very easily, well, maybe not easily, but can be figured out or at least determined, right? So, but I think it also has to work in concert with MLB, and that's a tough history, right, to get them at the table and agree on this. So that's where, to me, and once again, I'm pointing to myself because the Alumni Association could play a bigger role in telling the stories of the alumni, right? And I think the public, not because I think the public should so much as give a dime, but because they can tell the stories. And I think once you have the stories, this is one thing we've learned and seen in sports advocacy and activism, is that there's a powerful influence in telling these stories and having as many people repeating that story and getting it out there, where the pressure and the knowledge is undeniable, right? It's undeniable. And that's what really needs to be that next level. And I think there's a very constructive way to do it, a very unifying way to do that, where you can bring in, and that's what I'm good at. That's my space, because I've always been a harmonizer. Even though I stay firm on certain, issues, I've always wanted to bring people together in a way that, moves the ball forward in a way that's universally seen as, okay, this is a positive. Let's take the snow shoveling, right? I had to, it was tough because I had to take on the police department, right, West Hartford Police Department, and I had to kind of call them out, and that's a little dicey, right? How's that going to go? But in the end, I end up serving on the Police Standards and Training Council for the state, working very closely with law enforcement, because I tapped my experience growing up in my hometown, where police were volunteering and helping as coaches on my baseball teams, or they were working with my father for many years, who was a psychiatrist, and gave him a police escort when he passed away. So I think that's, to me, the key. And I, Doug Gladstone, as I've said a number of times, his passion, that passion and that dedication needs to sort of now be transferred in a way to that many others who are right around this game, who have the power, say, wait a minute, yeah, that's absolutely right. We need to take care of these guys. We need to take care of these guys at an unprecedented level, not just and not just because there was precedent created by reopening it to give some of these players, some money, but because they're going to go above and beyond and realize that these are like the pioneers of the system. And that's, so the short answer to your question is it's partly due to that disconnect between the branches. It's almost like the branches of baseball being able to talk the same language. I think if you get all these people with all their expertise in the room and everybody's on board, and you get the players, you get the alumni, you get everybody say, yeah, we want to do this, it will get done. And I think it would be a really powerful statement about caring about your history and the pioneers that came before.
Mark, you're up.
Well, I wanted to take a little bit of a segue because I know it's an important topic and we were talking about it, but I'm actually watching then our folks on Facebook Live are watching the same thing too. It looks like it's Game 3 of the 2003 NLCS, and somebody hit a big triple. I wonder who that was.
Yeah.
What? Mr. Glanville, could you take us back to that time in 2003? That was your only, I believe, your only at bat of the series too.
Yeah, in the championship series, NLCS, yes, that was my only at bat. I had one at bat in the DS against the Braves. Yeah, this was the moment, and it's funny you bring that up because we're right at the trade deadline in Major League Baseball. And that year in 2003, I was with the Texas Rangers. And keep in mind, I left the Texas Rangers. I left the Philadelphia Phillies after, I guess it was 5 years there as a free agent. And that was tough because I went to college there. It was my childhood team. I loved Philadelphia. I just had a good relationship. But my father passed away that offseason, and I really wanted to reset. And I also was losing my starting role as a center fielder there. And the Rangers were like, come calling. They said, so I left Philadelphia and, moved on, and I got hurt early in Texas in 2003. So when I came back from my injury, I got hot eventually, and I got traded back to the Cubs, the team that drafted me, the Cubs. So that took a long road to get to this 2003 moment. And to tell you, I wrote an article recently. It's coming out on NBC Sports about the frustration I actually had when I got traded. It seemed like, it's a homecoming. You're back to Chicago where they drafted you. But I was a starter in Texas, and I hit, I think, almost 390, 389, something like that in July. So I was like, wow, I'm back on track. I'm a free agent, and I'm getting old, and I can still play this game. And then all of a sudden I was traded to the Cubs, and I became like a fifth outfielder. And that was tough. And Cubs were only 500 the day I got traded. So there was no guarantee they were going to make it. So to get that moment after, rehabbing back from injury, torn hamstring, by the way, it's pretty crazy. Getting traded, my father passing away, all these things, that was big. It was bigger than the story of just the significance on the baseball field. And I say that because it circles back to what we're talking about, this class of pre-1980. It's this idea of telling that story, and there's so many stories behind the story that are could add so much to not only the game but just our humanity and how we celebrate it. So for me, that was certainly the greatest Major League Baseball moment, but it was great because of so many other reasons, not just the actual being part of winning that game, but it was the road that I took and the supporters that helped me get to that place in the first place.
But Doug, if I could, the stories, are they being communicated? Because, I understand better than most that, my style is not your style. You're the consensus builder. I'm the bull in the china shop. And yes, there are places for both of our brands. They're unique. But what I'm concerned about is that the players themselves, if we're to tell these stories, are the players aware of it? And I'll tell you why I say that. Maybe it's an anomaly, but one of the men who were affected by this, former Cub named Darcy Fast. Darcy Fast was counted on to be in the back-end rotation for the 69 Cubs after he had a little cup of coffee in 68. It turns out he was drafted, and his experiences